All right, so got the steering box all located, and then I just drew the templates, cut on the plasma cam, some frame plates. Now this frame was cut at a taper. I didn't really care for the taper, so I'm gonna change that. So I have to cut that back off, and here's the one side already cut. Show some clips of cutoff wheel, getting that done. And then we just gotta do this side, and then I'll box in the frame, get those tacked in, and then I'll show you that in a second. Alright, so after I got the radius arms on, I started to cycle for steering. This truck is an early Ford bump side, so the steering box was behind the front suspension. It was right here on the frame, behind the cross member, and the steering went behind the tires for a rear steer. But I wanted to convert it to a front steer because I had the four-wheel drive diff and everything. So this is a 3/4 ton Chevy Express Fan Saginaw box, and I was able to figure out where I wanted it to get the tie rods, everything to clear the steering box, to clear the power steering pump, all of that stuff. So then I drilled the 3 holes, and then I machined these pieces of 1.25" heavy wall, because these are 14 mil with a 9/16 bolt. So that's an 1.25" with a 9/16 through hole on all 3 of these, because the box has, sorry you can't really see it too well, but the box has a little bump for the factory frame. So from these mounting holes, you can see it's not that close to the frame. It's about 3/8 of an inch, and the bulge on the inside of the steering box is about a 1/16 inch from touching the frame, because I didn't want to have it hanging way out, so I hung it real close. And then to get the swinger position, I knew that roughly where I wanted the swinger on the frame, so I knew about how long this stuff needed to be, because I knew where the pitman arm, which isn't on here, but I knew where the pitman arm would be for the steering box, perfectly straight, and I knew roughly how long these swingers needed to be. So I started with tabs that are similar to this, but I did a slotted hole. So I was able to cut these and see how it's notched there, so I could put it right on top of the frame for both swingers. And then I was able to put the bolt right here on both, level the top of this with a digital angle finder, zeroed it, and then I was able to measure from the ground level. The truck's nice and level, so I was able to measure to the center of the beam pivot and to the center of these bolts here, and I was able to figure that out. And then these tie rods here are just 1.25" mild steel, because I'm using 1.25" 375 wall chromoly that I'm gonna have machined the threads in the end. So it's the same diameter, so for clearance and all that. But I was able to move the swinger up and down and then cycle it. So how I was able to measure for bump steer was I used this piece of angle iron here that I cut at 40 inches long to replicate the length of the tire. I drilled 2 holes so I could bolt it to the hub nice and tight, so I knew right where the wheel hub is. So I was able to do this for this side and for the driver's side, and to get full bump and full droop to be able to measure all the way across, I actually had this on the bottom side of the hub, but I was able to measure from the same spot right on the inside, hook it on the inside on both sides, and come over and measure, do the front, do the back, get the alignment perfectly where I wanted it, 0 degrees. or 0 toe in, and then was able to, that was at ride height, and then I cycled it at bump, measured, and I'm getting an 1/8 inch of toe in at full bump, which is 12 inches up travel, and 1/8 inch toe in at full droop with the swinger location. And what I did is just take really good notes and then would move the swinger up and down a 1/8 inch at a time, cycle it, and I did that for 2 full days, me and my dad, to get the position where we wanted. And then when I finally got the spot that I was happy, I had a washer. See here, the washer. I had a washer under this bolt. So when I got it where I liked it, I was able to always level this 0 degrees. Then I was able to tack the washer. And then I had to pull the bolt, break this side off, make the new tab the correct height from here. So I was able to make this tab, bolt it all on there, tighten it up with this washer still welded on this side, and then I was able to zero it out. And then I knew where this tab was going, so I could tack it both and then loosen it off, break this tab off, which is the front tab, because this one is just a straight 5/8 hole, so I knew it wasn't going to be able to go up and down. And then make this tab, zero it out, tack this one on, and then I did the same thing for the passenger side swinger. And then I was able to get a full 30 inches of wheel travel with an 1/8 inch of toe in at bump and an 1/8 inch toe in at droop. I'd rather have a little bit of toe in than toe out. It seems to keep everything happy and make it live quite a bit longer. So even though you would want 0 bump steer, I've learned over the years that a little bit of toe in is not a bad thing. So that's when I got it to where it was an 1/8 inch toe in from ride height to bump, and from ride height to droop, it was an 1/8 inch toe in over 30 inches of travel. That's pretty dang good, and I'll never feel that in the steering wheel. And if I turn the wheels, they'll go exactly where I want it to. So I'm happy with that. Got the location, made the tabs for the driver's side here and the passenger side. And here's the passenger side, and then this side's already all fully welded and able to box it in. And I had the turbo on and did some more tubes, and this tube here doesn't just hit the top of this plate. The tube actually goes all the way through to the frame. So I fully welded that and then put this tube in, and then was able to plate it in, because it would be easier to have this tube just hit the top of this box part, but then all of the load is on this web. So if it really wants to rip off, I feel that it could move this web and actually squeeze the bushings or mess with the steering. So I wanted this tube to be fully tied into the frame, and then this I just notched around the tube to make it fit and get boxed in there real good. So that's why I always do that. Sometimes it is an easier way to do things, but I learned that sometimes cutting corners to save a few minutes will cause a DNF or many hours of downtime in the future. Because if this thing flexes a lot for some reason and it pinches the steering and blows out the bushing, that could cause a huge accident, and I didn't want to risk any of that. So even if you think it would be easier just to run the tube to the top of this plate, because then it would just be a nice angle, spend a little more time and get this fitted onto the frame first. And then I fully welded the tube here and then put this on, because once you have this piece on here, you aren't going to be able to weld up in those corners very well. So I always weld that first before you put the plates and hide it. Just like this bump stop here, there's a tube. So I was able to fully weld the tube, fully welded this swinger, fully welded the beam pivot. I had to fully weld things before I tacked in other pieces of plate that covered and hid it and made it impossible to fully weld. So That's a tip that I've learned over many years. There's kind of an order of operations when assembling stuff. Yes, everything's tacked together, but this tube's tacked together, but when it's tacked in, it would hide this joint. So I fully welded this joint from point to point on both sides. So when you fit this tube is still 360 degrees welded, and then this tube will weld over it, instead of this tube being just welded from this point around to the same point on the other side. It's a little helpful tip when fitting tubes, like on the roll cage, the diagonals, all that stuff. If you know for sure that the horizontal tube is not going to be moving and a diagonal is hitting it, or your B-pillar and upper rear roof tube is where they're going to be, weld the corners before you fit tubes over it, because even though people say their cage is sometimes 360 degrees welded, a lot of times when you start cutting out tubes, you look in the tube and you'll see that the bottom of the other tube isn't fully welded. There are situations where you can't fully weld one tube to fit in the other one. So you could cut the point off, fit it in there, and then put another piece in here. A fellow YouTuber, Metul Monkey, he's doing a blazer, and he's doing a tips and tricks to show you how to fit diagonals where they go from the longest point to the longest point, and there's no way to slip it up in there. So you can do one side, but the other end you have to cut one of the points off to fit it up in there, and then he's showing you how to use some of the tube notching scraps or even the piece that you cut off to be able to fit it back in there, and then you'll have a simple weld here and then nice weld there, and it'll be plenty strong, just like if it was a continuous piece, because this is 120 wall tube. So if you create a little gap when you do your fitment and you fully weld it, it'll be a full pin weld and you won't have to worry about anything failing there. All right, remember when I said it was days of cycling the suspension to get it work good? So here's some of my notes. You can see bump, droop, right height, bump, droop, right height. And as you can see, I got to where I was changing it 1/16 of an inch, and it was still giving me different amounts of change. See, a 1/16 inch different went from 3/8 toe in to a 5/8 toe in, from an 1/8 inch toe in at droop to a 1/4 inch toe in at droop. And then I finally got to my measurement that I wanted, and I did the stars to let me know that that's a good one. And then I changed all the measurements and then cycled it 2 or 3 more times and then put it back to these same measurements and cycled it again, and it was still the exact same that I wanted. So then I knew it was good, so then I started the leveling again, replacing one tab, taking off one tab, leveling, replacing the other tab, vice versa for both sides. And then I cycled it all, and it still was at the same measurement, which means that nothing moved for the worse or for the better. It was exactly the same as I wanted it. And that's one thing I've learned, is when you're setting up stuff, to take notes. I keep this on my clipboard with a pencil or with a pen that I keep on my workbench or hanging on the wall. And there's numerous times where, while I'm building stuff, I'll take a measurement and I know that I'll be needing that in the future. So I just take notes, write it down, draw a little sketch, all that stuff, and it'll help you in the future to learn just to take notes. Because when you're measuring something and you're measuring it the same thing 10 different times, you can't remember at some point if it was an 1/8 inch or 1/4 or 3/8, stuff like that. So taking good notes on what you're measuring will help you to get a better product in the end after you've cycled it and you know exactly where you want it. Shock mounts, stuff like that too. I made measurements, and so I can measure from the tube to the shock mount, the shock angles, all of that stuff. So I always keep notes, and it pays off every time when you're doing it at the end. And I don't need these measurements anymore, but I do know that this truck is 86.25 inches from wheel mount to wheel mount on the front end at ride height, 0 degree toe in. So I'm able to check all that, and I know that the front end of this truck will be from wheel mount to, or from outside of tire to outside tire, 94 inches wide, because it'll look good with my fiberglass. The McQueen fiberglass is 92 inches, so I want it a little bit wider. And with beams, you could actually go probably 6 or 8 inches wider than the fiberglass, because you have so much negative camber at bump that the tire will still tuck in. But 94 inches wide is already a wide truck, and a lot of the trails now are set up for side-by-sides, stuff like that, and they're a lot narrower. Even my old Tacoma was 86 inches from outside of tire to outside of tire, and there were certain trails that I went on there where I was bushwhacking because the truck was narrower. So I will have to be a little more careful with this truck on what trails I go in, and if I think it's not a very good trail, I probably shouldn't go down it unless I want to get some desert pinstriping, aka a bunch of scratches down the side of the truck from the bushes and scratches on the fiberglass. So I'll have to do a little more pre-running and have other people go in front of me, and then let me know if there's a narrow spot to slow down or try to find another route around a tree, stuff like that.